Hello, and welcome to Old Ways in New Jersey. I'm Angus Kress Gillespie, your host. Previously on Old Ways in New Jersey, we've talked with traditional folk musicians from central New Jersey, traditional black gospel singers. We've also looked at an antique wooden street organ imported from Holland, old fossils from New Jersey's coastal plain. We've even explored the story of New Jersey's own legendary monster, the Jersey Devil. But today, we're going to try something different. We're here in the studio with Gordon Ward. Gordon is an author, presenter, and educator. He grew up in Bernardsville, New Jersey, and he went on to college at Fairleigh Dickinson University in Madison, New Jersey. A lifelong writer, Mr. Ward's works have included books, speeches, newspaper and magazine articles, and even poetry. But today, we want to focus on his latest book, The Ghosts of Central Jersey, with a focus on Somerset and Hunterdon counties. It's my pleasure to welcome Gordon Ward to our studio today. Gordon, tell us a little bit about growing up in Bernardsville, New Jersey.
Burnsville, New Jersey, when my parents moved there in 1959, it was a very rural, almost farm-like setting. And I have memories of just running through backyards and nobody really cared about whose yard you were in. It was almost like the pre-law era. Nobody cared about who was in there.
And I guess you didn't bother to lock your door.
No one locked. Well, a couple of people. That was the exception, really. Yeah. It's a beautiful area.
And then later you went to Fairleigh Dickinson University. Tell us a little bit
Fairleigh
about
Dickinson, yep. Graduated in 1981, was a music major and then an art major, and then settled down into psychology.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's a good lead in psychology. When did you first become interested in the paranormal?
When I was 7 or 8.
Oh, 7 or 8.
Yeah, I grew up.
Tell us about that.
The house in Bernardsville was haunted. I mean, there's no way around it. I mean, everybody experienced things in there.
The house that you were living in?
Parents, grandparents, brothers and sisters, people that came over. I don't have a sister. I don't know why I said that, but the whole family. And
was this a family house, or did you just purchased it?
No, my parents bought it in 1959, about a year after I was born. And just growing up, we'd hear things, see things, objects would move. And my father, who was a college professor, the book Ghosts of Central Jersey actually starts off like this. It's the first time that I can remember my father was a college professor, say, I don't know. We'd ask him what these sounds were. And when you're a little kid, your father knows everything. Uh-huh. And when you're 7 years old and you say, Dad, what is that? And he'd say, I don't know. It's like, whoa. So that made me really interested in trying to explain what these phenomenon were in the house that we were growing up.
Oh, yeah, like I can relate to that. Your father being a college professor, he's used to having an answer for nearly everything.
Right.
And so you were sort of startled when he
And he was a botany professor, so we'd go out in the woods. He would know every bird, every plant, every tree, every piece of moss. So to hear him say, I had no idea.
But these weird noises, he couldn't account for them.
Weird noises, apparitions, figures that people would see. Yeah.
Well, not to put you on the spot, but would you consider yourself a skeptic or a believer?
Both.
Oh, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I think there are people that will believe in hauntings and ghosts and everything to them is possible. And then there are skeptics that don't believe, even if they're presented with tons of evidence, they're still not going to go over on that side of the fence and say that ghosts exist. I definitely think they do, but when I approach a investigation or a story, I'm skeptical because you have to weed out what might have another way of explaining it. It might be another way of explaining something that people are experiencing or seeing or hearing. And once you weed those out, then you're left with something where you have to really take a good look at it and say, okay, are you going to believe or not?
I think I understand you have to struggle to keep an open mind.
Yeah, I definitely have an open mind, but a lot of times you come up with things that are so easily explained away that
it's almost like
you have to go with that.
Muscle tension. You don't want to be too uptight and you don't want to be too loose.
That's right.
You have to
that's
steer
right.
that middle ground.
That's true.
Which is not easy to do. It's almost easier to be a skeptic or a believer.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier for people to sort of rectify that stuff in themselves. And
because it's hard to live with ambiguity.
Well, and this topic is all about ambiguity.
Yeah.
You know, people cannot prove that ghosts exist. I can't prove it. No one out there can really prove it. You can collect evidence towards their existence, but that's about it.
Well, that's a good point.
It's like faith, actually.
Yeah, that leads to my next question. If you were going into a place that's alleged to be haunted, how do you go about conducting, say, a level-headed, open-minded investigation?
Most of your work is done before you ever get there. There's a lot of historical work you do to find out who lived there, what events transpired there, what buildings used to exist on the grounds before you know, the place that you're actually going to investigate was built. Who was involved in the properties. And you interview people, you find out what their experiences were, and then once you have a solid historical base to go from, then you can move into doing your investigation. But even then, before you do that, you have to secure the building. You have to find out what type of heating system is there, what sounds the building makes, secure things on shelves so things aren't falling off. There's a lot of work that goes into the investigation before you even start it. So once you do that, then there's different steps you can take in the investigation that might involve audio recording, video recording, and things of that nature. Yeah.
I'd like to jump right into the ghosts of Central New Jersey, which is the topic of your latest book.
Yeah, it was funny. When the book first came out, I had somebody look at it and say, "Are there ghosts in New Jersey?" I'm like, yeah.
Duh. Yeah. Well, specifically, the Vtown Inn. I understand, like, Vtown no longer exists per se. Vtown is what became Bernardsville.
Correct.
And there's an inn there. And some say that it's haunted by the innkeeper's daughter.
It's actually the Vtown Tavern. Most people know it as the old Bernardsville Library because of the Bernardsville Library from 1901.
And it was a post office, too, at one point.
Post office during the Civil War.
Yeah.
And now it's an interior design shop. But I grew up in Bernardsville, so
of course, yeah.
The big story was Phyllis, the library ghost. And it was supposed to be the daughter of the tavern keeper during the Revolutionary War, and how she fell in love with a boarder who was staying there, Dr. Byram. And Dr. Byram ended up being accused of being a spy for England during the Revolutionary War for Great Britain. Yeah. And the story goes that he stole papers that belonged to Anthony Wayne, General Anthony Wayne, when he came through town and stayed at the tavern. And they searched the morning that they discovered that these papers are gone. They sent out soldiers to look for this Dr. Byram, and they found him, tried him. Within 30 minutes, they had hanged him as a spy. His body was brought back to the tavern that night, supposedly, and discovered by Phyllis, and who went insane when she saw the body. And ever since then, there have been these reports of things happening in this building.
Huh. And can you tell us a little bit about the ghosts of the New Jersey Brigade at the Morristown National Historical Park? My recollection is that this was the site of George Washington's encampment during the winter of 1779.
It was, yeah. And these two stories are kind of interconnected.
Yeah,
and I need to say
both Revolutionary War era. Yeah.
Exactly. Before we move off of Vtown, I need to say that this is a good example, a good story that is an example of how folklore and history
interact.
Interact, yes. Because what we found with our investigation is that Phyllis Parker never existed.
Huh.
She never existed. And if you look at the story, it was really interesting because there was never a Dr. Byram. There was never a spy hanged in Vtown during the year of January 1777, and General Wayne was not even in Vtown during January of 1777. He was in charge of Fort Ticonderoga. So this whole thing just falls apart. It got its start because a woman had an experience there in 1877, told it to her brother, who ended up being a newspaper reporter, who spun it into this, love story, this tragic love story. And so what we've ended up with is that the experiences that people have had there are occurring. It's just not Phyllis Parker. So,
yeah, but because it's a good story, it's plausible, it's credible.
It is plausible. That's why people grabbed onto it, because they knew for a fact soldiers stayed there during the Revolutionary War. They knew that the Parker family owned the tavern. They knew that there was a General Wayne, although he wasn't in the area. So, they knew that there were spies in the area. So but once that story got presented, people didn't question it because of those factual pieces.
It's really disappointing to learn that it's not true.
It's disappointing to know that it's not true, but it's also, I think it's very exciting because, okay, it's not Phyllis Parker. Who is it?
So getting back to Morristown, this is George Washington's encampment, 1779, 1780. It's a very brutal winter.
Worst winter they had.
Yeah.
Worst winter they had.
So some of the American Patriot soldiers died of malnutrition, exposure, whatever. And some say that the place is still haunted by their ghosts.
Yeah, people have seen soldiers crossing Jockey Hollow Road. They've seen soldiers up in Jockey Hollow Park, Morristown National Historical Park. Soldiers did die from disease and exposure and starvation, and worst winter because most people think, oh, Valley Forge was the worst winter. Well, yeah, like 3,000 men died at Valley Forge, but in terms of the brutality of the winter of 1779, 1780 was so much worse. Temperatures, and they're in these little log huts with 4 feet of snow and 6-foot drifts. Temperatures got above 0 degrees in January of 1780 once.
Wow.
Once. And supply roads were cut off, and yeah, men died. Not as many, between 100 and 200 men, I believe, died during that time period. But people have reported seeing apparitions, these figures of soldiers in the woods up there.
It's an interesting place. I've been there. You go up a kind of a hill, and you go up high enough, and you can sort of see the Manhattan skyscrapers in the distance.
You can, yeah.
Which is kind of amazing.
One of the sites. And that's one of the reasons why Washington chose to encamp there.
So you could keep an eye on things.
Keep an eye on the British, but yet it had good sources for water. It was sort of, depending upon where you were on those hillsides, you were protected from the weather a little bit more. And the New Jersey Brigade site, which is down actually in Bernardsville, it's the far end of the park. That's where I've done most of my investigation.
I guess the British were quite comfortable to just stay in the heated houses of New York City. And they weren't eager to come out and fight during the winter.
It was Washington who had to sort of,
tough it out,
hunker down and survive that winter. Right.
Well, I'd like to move on to the Great Swamp, natural wildlife refuge. Some people say that in the Great Swamp area, there's the ghost of a Headless Hessian soldier.
Yeah, there's a couple of ghosts, actually, that people report there. One is the ghost of a little girl that's been given the name Amy, which Washington's carriage actually stopped for once. They saw a little girl walking in the snow, opened the door to give her a ride, and she had vanished, and no footprints were left in the snow.
That sounds like almost like a contemporary urban legend.
Yeah. But Headless Hessian, which is based upon a factual story of 3 Hessians riding through Basking Ridge during the Revolutionary War. And if you were a colonist that was not loyal to the crown, you didn't like the Hessians. So there were a bunch of townspeople that attacked these 3 Hessians, and one of them had his head almost severed from his body, and his horse carried him off into the swamp.
Oh my God.
And since then, people have reported seeing this ghost of a Headless Hessian in and around the Great Swamp in the towns of Myersville and New Vernon and Basking Ridge and towns like that. What's interesting is that when you talk about a ghost of a headless horseman, most people think of Washington Irving and the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. And what I find is really, really fascinating is that a lot of literary experts believe that when Washington Irving was writing his books about George Washington, that he spent time in the places where George Washington spent time, Manhattan and out in Morristown, because that was the encampment site for 2 of the winters. And it's thought that when he was in Morristown, when Washington Irving was in Morristown, he heard the story about the Headless Hessian, and thought, what a great story, and I'm going to take it up to the Hudson River Valley and reset it. And what's really cool...
That's quite plausible.
Quite plausible. And in the cemetery, what I've discovered in the cemetery behind the Basking Ridge Presbyterian Church, which is where a lot of the records were held during the time that Washington Irving was doing his research. If you walk out into that historic cemetery, there are 2 headstones side by side. One is broken off in half. Both say, purchased by Ichabod Crane. So you can just imagine in your mind's eye Washington Irving doing this, research, and he's tired and bleary-eyed, and he's getting up to take a break, and he's walking through the cemetery thinking about this story of the Headless Hessian. Needs some, characters, and Ichabod Crane is on 2 of those headstones.
You're not just making this up.
No, you can go. Go there. Viewers can go there to
that really
cemetery
uncanny.
Yeah. So it's great because this. Arguably one of the most famous ghost stories to come out of American literature.
Has New Jersey roots.
Had its roots right here in Morristown, Morristown area.
The Gladstone Hotel in Gladstone, New Jersey. I'm told that there was a little boy who drowned in a creek nearby, and it may be visited by his ghost. And there's also a woman involved who may or may not be the little boy's mother. No one's quite sure. I don't know if I have that right.
This building has been a number of different things. It's been a Gladstone Hotel. It's been the Gladstone Tavern. It's been Chatfield's. It's Gladstone Tavern right now. But people have seen a figure of a boy with blue suspenders in what's now the stock room of the tavern. There is a boy that is said to have drowned in a waterway nearby in the middle of the 1800s. There is a figure of a woman that's seen in there atop of the stairs, and about a year ago she was last seen at the very top of the stairs behind the balusters looking down at one of the waiters in there, and she just vanished. The other account that happens there is that one of the night managers she'd be the last one out, and she would set the tables, perfectly for the next morning, and she'd leave and lock up. The next person in would find things scattered all over the table. So
inexplicable.
Inexplicable because there's nobody in the building between the time the night manager left and the person came in the morning to open up, and everything was, you'll find things out of place on the tables quite often. Yeah.
Back in the 1700s, 1800s, up and down the Delaware River, there were a lot of mills. Of course, you would use the water power for these industrial villages. Yep. And one of them's been pretty well preserved, the one in Prallsville.
In Stockton, called the Prallsville Mills.
Right. Yep. But there may be some ghosts associated with that Prallsville mill.
There are. There are. Reported by some of the people who run that historic area. They'll hear noises. They'll hear almost the mill machinery working. Sometimes there have been people who have had their names called to them. People walking up on the second floor, which is locked, and they'll unlock it and go up there, and no one's up there. And in the John Prahl House across the street, they have similar things happening there. Now, the John Prahl House is only open on Sundays, I believe.
Yeah, and they have concerts there.
They have concerts in the mill area. Yep. Yeah, it's a great place. Great place. But they'll hear people come in the front door when the front door is locked over the John Prahl House and call hello, and they'll come downstairs and no one's there. All the doors they'll find closed sometimes when they like to keep them open. It's fascinating.
It's strange because it's very well preserved.
It's a beautiful place.
Yeah.
Whether or not
they put some money into it too.
Yep. If you're into history and historic locations, whether or not you're into the haunted part of it, I would recommend going to Prallsville. It's a great place.
Another place of great interest is the Grain House in Bernardsville, which nowadays is kind of an upscale catering hall, restaurant, hotel.
And it used to be a barn that sat across the street. And Yeah, people have reported a number of different things in there. One being a...
Didn't you told me one time that sometimes the motion detector goes off and the police will arrive?
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that story. Ghost of a little girl, a figure of a little girl that's seen in amongst the tables. But yeah, the motion detectors will go off at times, and when they arrive to see who's inside, they'll unlock it. No one's inside. But the motion detectors have followed somebody coming from the top floor, down the stairs, through the entire first floor and into the kitchen, and yet no one's there when they open it up. There's also the figure of a Continental soldier who's seen upstairs, and he's putting on a boot, and he stands up and vanishes. Yeah. Huh. So there's a few different stories about that place. Yeah.
Well, I guess that's not proof that a ghost exists, but it's but it opens the door to the possibility of belief.
It does, and it's not the same people that are experiencing these things either. It's people who don't know about the other people that have experienced them, and they're coming up with similar stories. So whenever you can corroborate information like that from people who have no reason to really report them, then that makes it.
I guess especially if such a person were a naive or a skeptic, or they're not a buff.
Right. Well, that's what's interesting to me is that sometimes you get these people who are not looking for that. One of the people who I spoke to who saw the soldiers crossing the road up by Morristown National Historical Park, these Revolutionary War soldiers. They were not looking for that at all. This is just a road that leads up to the park. It wasn't even in the park itself, and she wasn't even thinking about Continental soldiers or whether it was haunted or not. She just saw this, and
that makes it more compelling.
Pretty amazed. Yes. Yeah.
Gordon, by way of recapping, what exactly is a ghost?
There's lots of different ways to explain what a ghost is. Ghost is a big umbrella term. And it basically falls into three categories. It can be apparitional, which means that it has some sort of a consciousness. It has an awareness. It's a remnant. It's the inner part of us, I believe. I think our bodies are like clothes that we take off. And when our bodies no longer work or they wear out, we move out of them. And it's that essence that is our eternal essence that remains. That's what an apparition is. Residual hauntings and ghosts are something else. That's nothing more than a recording. Like you'd play your favorite song on a CD or your favorite movie on a DVD. It's energy that is recorded in an atmosphere, and when a person with enough psychic ability is in that location, they can pick up on this, and they can see things like a tape loop almost, replaying. People have different abilities in art and math and sciences, and some people have higher abilities in the psychic end of things as well. And then the other one is poltergeist, which has nothing to do with that movie that came out in the 80s.
Isn't a poltergeist a ghost that moves things around?
It can. So can apparitional hauntings as well. But poltergeist, we think, from the research that's out there, is energy coming from a living person in that environment. And unbeknownst to them, their energy can make things move in that environment or cause rapping sounds or knocking sounds and things like that. So in that case, it has nothing to do with anything that's passed away or died at all. Yeah.
And not to put you in a pigeonhole, but would you call yourself a parapsychologist?
No, parapsychologists that name is reserved for somebody who has done a legitimate body of study. Like I wouldn't call myself a psychiatrist either, because I haven't done that work. There's coursework out there that you can do to become a parapsychologist. Now, lots of people will call themselves parapsychologists just because they study ghosts. Yeah. But that's a field of study in and of itself. I would call myself a paranormal researcher.
Okay.
Something like that. Not a ghost hunter. I don't bag ghosts and hang them on my wall, and I don't do that. But paranormal researcher seems to be a good title.
How long have you been doing this kind of work?
Well, like I said, I got interested in this when I was 7 years old. So I've been following the research and doing investigations for a long time. More seriously, though, since maybe the mid '80s.
If a person dies in a house, will that house become haunted?
No, not necessarily. No, what I think is that if it's an apparitional haunt, people have to have a reason to stay there. Whether there's something that hasn't, they wanted to get done, or they need to communicate. You look at, the world at large. People have died everywhere. Famous battlefields out there. There's thousands of men that died on the battlefield. Doesn't mean that there's thousands of ghosts there. So there needs to be a reason, I think, why that person is staying behind. Or if it's an imprint, if it's a residual haunt, then there could be lots of different reasons why, not reasons, but there could be lots of residual imprints in a building. But again, because it's residual, it has nothing to do with an actual entity that's there and wanting to communicate.
And nowadays, we're in the 21st century. I guess there's all kinds of equipment out there. What would be the most powerful investigative tool in terms of gadgets?
For me, it's an audio recorder. If you have a digital audio recorder, I think that's the best tool. Everybody can get their hands on one, and you can record voices called EVP. It's electronic voice phenomenon. And the reason why I think that's such a good piece of evidence is that with EVP, with recordings, if you record a person's voice, you can, by looking at the voice signature, you can prove that it's not the researcher's voice, and you can prove that it's a human voice, and yet it's someone who's not there at the time. You can't hear the voice when it's being recorded. You can hear it on playback. So, that's pretty hard to refute. Now, it's not proof that ghosts exist. It's just evidence towards their existence.
And if somebody is particularly interested in this kind of thing, what advice would you give them? Read your book, I presume, would be step one.
Well, they can read this book. There's lots of books out there on the topic. Ghosts of Central Jersey is a historical book and sort of a how-to book, and certainly they can start.
Should they attend a class? Should they join a group, or what should they
There's
do?
lots of groups out there. Some are more skeptical than others. There are some groups out there that will believe anything is a ghost, so you have to be careful about that.
Well, what's the difference between a ghost hunt and a ghost investigation?
They're pretty similar. It's really the same thing. It's just I prefer ghost research or ghost investigation as opposed to a hunt, because you're not really hunting things, I don't think. I just don't like that term myself.
If I were to go to a graveyard to photograph, should I notify the local police first? What should I do?
Well, yes, you need to follow the rules so you don't end up being arrested. But I would not advise people to go to a cemetery anyway, because you're out there at night, you have extraneous noises that you're dealing with, planes and animal sounds and trees and leaves and things like that. Plus, for people who are just getting into it, as soon as they step foot into a graveyard or a cemetery where they've got a bunch of friends, they start to imagine things, and all of a sudden a twig snap becomes, the ghost of somebody walking through the graveyard. So it's just a place that I would have people avoid in the beginning, at least, unless they have a really good reason to go there.
Okay. Well, Gordon, I want to thank you for coming out to East Brunswick. It's been very enlightening.
Thank you.